Okay, so this time we're going to be talking about nutrition, but we're not going to be talking about food exactly? What if we told you that nutrition is not only about the foods you eat? Welcome to the Wellness Champion Podcast, sponsored by Healthy Transformation Nation. We believe that your health and wellness is determined by your own self-care more than anything else. Join us for each episode when we discover and uncover the keys to self-care in today's complex culture. We enjoy helping others discover the best ways to be well. We'll be visiting the basics for self-care and ongoing wellness that enables you to not only survive, but to thrive. On the Wellness Champion Podcast, we'll be exploring the fundamentals of intentional breathing, your hydration, nutrition, intentional movement, and your wellness mindset. The Wellness Champion Podcast is your time for a mindset reset. Welcome to this episode where we talk about the foods you eat and why on earth is nutrition not entirely related to the foods you eat.
It's a great question. So when I think of nutrition, before my understanding of what it meant, it was all about food. Nutrition for me was about food, dieting, and what I was putting in my body as far as the food that I would ingest. And what I've come to learn is there's actually different types of food, if you will, that we have in nutrition. And there's primary food and then there's secondary food. And a lot of people probably think that primary food is going to be the food you eat, right? That would seem to make sense. It really isn't. That's actually the secondary. And what I've found through working with mindset and working with the education that I've received, I've learned that primary food is so much more. It is the things we think about. It is the way we speak to ourselves. It's the things that we consume and we see on TV or social media. All of these different things.
That's our primary food.
That's our primary food, right? What we're seeing. Now, what we're eating is secondary food. Now, that secondary food part is important, but the primary food is important because they actually correlate together. And if, for me personally, I did not have a healthy relationship with food. I was in food addiction for over 40 years. And so food to me was almost an enemy. I didn't really understand it. It was something I knew I needed to have every day, but I was eating not for health reasons. I was eating just to eat because I thought I had to, and I was not mindful of what I was actually ingesting. And so that was nutrition really was about food, but then again, it wasn't about the type of food that I was eating because the type of food I was eating really didn't hold much nutritional value, hence the word nutrition, why I'm saying that. But the primary food that I learned was the mindset part, and that for me changed everything. There's more to it than that, but I want to talk about this one specifically because the mindset with food and how I felt about it, like I said, it was the enemy. It was something that I just did, and I actually abused it. I would eat when I wasn't hungry. I would eat when I wanted something. Or I should really say the real reason was because I needed something. And what I needed was to connect with myself. And that was the big picture, the big piece, I should say, that was missing in the big picture. I was missing that connection with myself. So I had this negative feeling about food. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of insecurity about it. I had a lot of body shaming going on with myself. And I also heard it from outside influences as well. And that can really have a great impact on your well-being. So this primary food and secondary food has been quite an interesting journey for me to embark upon, because now when I think of food, I think of what the value is, the value of what I'm putting in my body, and I make better choices what is best for my body now, as opposed to what I was, being told by the media or social
Okay, all right.
situations.
So wait, hold on a second now. Let's just unpack a little bit. Unpack a little bit what you've just been talking about.
All right, let's do it.
Cool. So the food that you, all right, so let's go back to our original question. What if we told you that nutrition is not only about the foods you eat?
Right.
And you're saying that we have a primary food
Primary food, correct.
and a secondary food.
That is correct.
And that the primary food is not food. Well, it's primary nutrition and secondary nutrition, or is it primary food, secondary food?
It's food for thought.
Food for thought. Yeah, we call it food for thought. Yeah.
Right?
So, all right. So what you're saying is that there is the primary food and the secondary food.
Right.
And everyone thinks, okay, primary food would be a type of food. But really what it is everything you take in other than food is your primary food.
That's right.
And then the foods that you actually eat, technically the fruits and vegetables and all that stuff,
Protein,
the
fats
protein and all that,
yes.
that's secondary.
Correct.
That's just a huge mind-blowing concept, I think, for most people.
I agree.
To wrap your head around.
Yeah, it really was for me, because I lived, like I said, from a place I looked at food as for me, it was the enemy. For other people, it's actually a place of enjoyment. And a lot of people go with their emotional feelings and what they're feeling in the moment with nutrition, with food specifically. A lot of people that I've come across in my life span is that a lot of people eat for flavor. They want to eat what they enjoy eating, but they're not looking at why they're eating what they're eating. They're just wrapped up in the moment. And I also, part of this primary food too is the consumption of what we see around us, as well as the things that we learn.
Right.
We learn growing up from our families.
Now,
what we should be consuming
talk
as well.
about lots of things. Well, we talk about 5 things.
Correct.
Lots of them? Lots of 5 things. We talk about 5 things in our Wellness Champion experience,
Right.
which is intentional breathing, and hydration,
Absolutely.
nutrition, intentional movement, and mindset.
Yes.
And all of those things are the things we're talking about here too. We're talking about, so when you are referring to your primary food, it can be your intentional movement. It can be the mindset that you have where you've come to a realization about something about yourself, that you want to make a change. And so you're in a growth mode. That's your mindset. Then hydration, the water that you drink.
Absolutely.
That's another primary food, another primary nutrition, right? Because actually when you think about the hierarchy of what your actual physical needs are to exist on this planet,
Right.
Number 1 is breathing, number 2 is water.
Exactly.
Right. And so therefore, food is number 3 on that list. Nutrition is number 3, but really nutrition encompasses more than just the food you eat.
Yeah, that's where the mindset piece
Yeah,
comes in. And the breathing too. Breathing is another piece of it, because when you are breathing, you're present in the moment. You're right there in the moment, and you're really connecting with yourself. And the mindset part is getting into the emotions, feeling into the emotions. And that's the primary food. That was the biggest disconnect for me for years with food, is I had no connection at all to my body or my mind or anything like that. It was all really discombobulated and jumbled up because of what I was hearing in my head and what I was saying to myself constantly.
So if I have never been thinking about this before, and this is the first time it just occurs to me, how would I start thinking about it? How would I start reframing? What could be something that I could do that would help me to reframe what my primary food is and what my secondary food is? When I think about my nutrition, what are the first things I should think about? Like, what are the first 3 things I would think about?
Well, the thing that comes for me is that, am I hungry? I mean, that's really the big question. Am I hungry? And tapping into what that really means. Is it true that I am really hungry for food? Am I hungry for water? Am I hungry for love? Because I could be in deficit. I might need some hugging and some loving, which I get plenty of now. But back in the day, it was a definite need. I needed affection. I felt that I needed this love.
Right.
And the other part of it is I wasn't loving myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
Yeah.
am I hungry? Really hungry? Am I thirsty? Okay. Or is it something more? Is there something that I'm feeling emotionally?
And by
that's
the way,
triggering
thirst, most of the time when we're hungry, and I'm going to challenge everyone on this, most of the time when you're hungry, you are probably only thirsty. Most people, I think it's like something like, I think we had figured out that 22% of people drink around the amount of water they would need to stay hydrated for a normal day.
Right.
So that means
Correct.
that, 78% of people, so more than 3/4 of people, so 1 out of 4 people at least, are in some form of dehydration.
Right.
So one of the first things you should ask yourself when you're hungry is, am I really thirsty?
Mm-hmm.
Is it hunger or is it thirst?
Yes.
Because the human body has a very difficult time distinguishing between those two things, whether you're hungry or you're thirsty. So the first go-to is have some water.
I think that's a great step.
Yeah, that was just an aside.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually
but,
probably the first question you should ask yourself is, if you're feeling hungry,
Mm-hmm.
am I thirsty?
Yeah, am I really thirsty?
Yeah, am I really thirsty? Is it something that and for the emotional part of it too, that is a huge part of it is emotionally what's going on in the moment that you are looking for food.
Yeah, like what kind of nutrition am I really seeking? Do I really need? Do I need the kind of nutrition that comes emotionally, or do I need the kind of nutrition that comes from actual food?
Physically, yeah, absolutely. Because we do have physical needs that we do need to eat. And the other part about that nutrition with what we're eating is that if we're eating whole foods, we need less of it and we're feeling more satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add that, most people, again, I think that, and you and I have talked about this, and I think we have talked about this with our members and our membership, but most people are walking around the earth, even though they think they are eating nutritionally well, they are actually walking around in a state of malnutrition without even knowing it, because of the types of food, the actual food that we're eating. And so that's a whole different avenue that we could take, but we're not going to be talking about that right now. I think what you were talking about was, and I totally lost my train of thought.
So I was talking about is the primary food and the secondary food, and the difference between the emotional needs that you have and the physical needs that you have. And a lot of time the needs that you have that trigger hunger is emotional needs. Yeah. Aside from the obvious, the hydration piece of it is the emotional needs. And for me, that was a big one. Mm-hmm. Emotional needs weren't being met. I was in a state of constant stress, fight or flight. And so I was consuming a lot of stress. I was consuming a lot of information on a daily basis that wasn't elevating me. It wasn't lifting me up. Mm-hmm. It was actually kind of bringing me down. And when I started to shift and change those things, started looking at the things that actually made me feel good outside of food, that for me was definitely moving. Movement was a huge catalyst for me in really getting connected with myself.
So here's number 3. So we talked about, three main things that you could kind of nutrition that you can look for before you turn to actual food. And one was hydration. Make
Yes.
sure you've had enough water. Number two is make sure you're emotionally fulfilled.
Yes.
Do you have any sort of emotional needs that are not being met that you are in some way, either in your mind or in your body, somehow you're trying to compensate for that with food? And then the third one is movement. Do you need to just simply be moving?
Right. Well, and the thing I found is that when I moved, a lot, and it seems so counterintuitive, but when I moved, I had less pain in my body. My mood was actually elevated. I actually felt better. I felt lifted up. And I also got connected with me in my body, which I had kind of been a foreigner to for a very long time because I was very uncomfortable in my body because of the way it looked and the way I moved. Then when I started moving with intention, that's the key, that's when things really changed for me. And like I said, I came into more of an alignment and a balance with myself. And it really made a huge difference. And because of the movement, I was fulfilled in a different way that I hadn't known before, because when I was younger, I really was not an active person either. So I wasn't doing intentional movement very much when I was young. And I did not drink water when I was young. So I was in a state of dehydration. I was also in a state of malnourishment because of the foods I was eating. So those three things that you mentioned right there, I was the poster child for the opposite of that.
Wow. So far we've talked about nutrition, and we haven't even talked about any actual food yet. We've talked about drinking enough water, making sure you're hydrated. We've talked about being emotionally nurtured and satisfied, and we've talked about movement. Now, who would have figured that in an episode about nutrition that we're not even talking about vegetables and proteins and things like that?
Right. We're talking about the primary food because these things are really necessary for us. You know, we have emotional needs. We have needs that are not met. If you look around, people are saying they're stressed all the time. I'm so stressed. Well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason that you're stressed. Are you connected with yourself? Are you getting the movement that you need? What are you putting into your body? Are you hydrated or are you malnourished? There are several different things going on with our bodies on a daily basis that we're just on autopilot. We don't think about it. We don't think about what we're putting in other than it's going to get me to the next place I need to go.
True.
Especially with caffeine. That's a huge one. Caffeine, stimulants, things like that. Or just the quick, I'm going to grab something quickly to eat just to get something in so I can move and go. And over time, the body is going to react when it's not getting its needs met. And that's where we move into the dis-ease.
Right. I mean, if you want to get really, if you want to if you want to dive a little bit deeper right now, in evolutionary terms, they say that it takes about 1 million years for a species, in terms of eating, it takes about 1 million years for a species that is eating something for that, whatever it is they're eating, to become a part of their diet. For example, I don't know, humans eat green leafy vegetables. So in the evolutionary of humans, it took 1 million years for humans for that to become a necessity in the human diet. So, but since we're talking about evolutionary history and humans, let's go back 10,000, 25,000, 50,000 years. There wasn't any social media. There wasn't any.
Right.
It was the only work to be done was to go out and find your food, and build your shelter, and make sure that your immediate needs are taken care of, and that you're protected from the environment. And so
the basics.
Yeah, and then now fast forward 50,000 years to today, those we still have things on our mind, I should say, that affect us in that way. Like there are stressors, but they're completely man-made stressors that are completely different from the kind of stressors that caused us to change what we eat. And so today, all of these different things that we're talking about, all these stressors, are working on you nutritionally in a negative way. And there are many more stressors today than there were 10,000 years ago. There was the big tiger that was going to eat you, and there was, watch out for the avalanche, and
the big bear or something
right.
like that. Yeah, definitely.
But now there are so many, and it seems like, we're so much safer now. It's so much easier now. Well, in a way, yes, but in a way, no, because now the stressors are much more devious.
And I think they're a lot more intense, because it's not so black or white where, a big bear or a tiger coming at you, you're going to run. That's the obvious response. But if something really intense is happening to you in a moment, that you got news that, your job is your company's going to downsize, right? You go into that same fight or flight, froze, whatever it is, state that you did back then, but the repercussions are not life or death.
Right.
And the body doesn't know the difference.
Correct. The body does not know the difference.
Yeah.
And so the body is going to react the same way it's been reacting, in humans for the last million years. And that is to, in certain cases, like when you're under a stressful situation, it shuts down your digestive system. It shuts down your ability to process food. And that's happening, in 10, 20,000 years ago, that happened maybe, once in a while, once a day or every couple days or something. Now it's happening every day, all day long, with many different things.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this primary food, are you consuming stress?
Right.
And because stress is really created here, our mindset creates the stress. How we take in the information, that kind of stress. Obviously, if a Big Mac truck is coming at you, that's okay. We know that that's just normal, and we would be moving out of the way and protecting ourselves. But when we have the stressors that are coming in on a regular basis, like you're mentioning, Bill, over and over and over again, you get phone call after phone call, or it could even be an email, or you get this call about your kids at school, one thing after another, all these things build up. And if we don't have things in place where we're connecting with the breath, where we're connecting with our emotions and what our needs are, and what we truly, truly desire and want in our life, then we're in deficit.
Right.
We're in a deficit at that point. So that's where primary food is primary, and that's why it's called primary, is because that's the basis of being able to eat the food that you ingest, like you talked about, with the digestion, being in a relaxed state, being able to digest the food properly, being able to utilize that food within the body as well.
Yeah. I love it, Nikilette, how you've broken it down for us between, the primary food and the secondary food. And the primary food isn't actually food at all.
Right, exactly.
I love it. And, but it is so very important that we set ourselves up for success. We set our bodies up for success. For when we do eat that actual food, that our body is in its best condition to be able to handle it, assimilate it, turn it into the, to the processes that it needs to use it for. And so, so it's very important.
And also a lot of the stress, it affects the gut. It definitely affects the gut. So if you're in that place of being mindful, of being present to where you are and what you are doing, and also not having any outside influences going on at the time. That's huge. A lot of people are just sitting there, shoveling it down, getting it in. Gotta go. Only got a 30-minute break. I gotta shovel it in and get right back to work. And there's the loss of the enjoyment of it too. It's just, I gotta plow through it.
Yeah.
And so it's really sitting down to your food and actually having a relationship with it, which is what I've learned over the years, is having this relationship with food. What does my colors of my food look like? Are the colors of my food 2 colors, maybe 3? Or do I have the rainbow? And there's the differentiation of the secondary food. What does your plate look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's something that we definitely get into in the Wellness Champion experience as well.
Absolutely.
And so for all of our members who are in the Wellness Champion experience, we go through every month, we provide them with ideas and thoughts and reports on what we find.
Yeah, it's the best that's for them, for the individual, because something that might work well for me might not work well for Bill, and vice versa. So we also have to come to an understanding, again, primary food, about what we really truly want, what our body can handle, what it needs, and having that relationship, because a lot of times people are having things, they're eating foods that their body doesn't like. Their body just doesn't, and I'm guilty of that. I did that for a really long time.
Yeah, well,
and that doesn't mean that it's bad. What it means is that it's just not the best for me.
So to wrap all this up, basically, we're talking today about nutrition, and we're not talking about food.
That's right.
Although it is very important for your nutritional intake. So this is to set you up for when you do eat something.
For success.
For success, yeah.
Yeah, these are just some tips and tricks to help you toward getting in a mindset of connection to yourself, connection to your needs, and connection with your food and your relationship with food. These are just some tips and tricks that we wanted to give everyone, so that way they're not wondering how to do it. They actually have some things to implement. So there again, we get into hydration and the intentional movement, and then the food part of it. Okay. That primary food and secondary food.
So we've talked about nutrition, and we really didn't go into exactly about the foods you eat. Mm-hmm. We talked about how you can set yourself up for good nutrition before you even sit down to take a bite.
Yes.
And that's through your mindset and your hydration and your movement.
Yes.
And I think one thing that we sort of touched upon, but I'd like to just kind of maybe wrap this up with, is your happiness. Mm-hmm. Now, I know everyone I think probably is familiar with the term, happiness is an inside job. But what I really want to drive home is that happiness is not your destination. You're not finding a place to be happy. Mm-hmm. Happiness is the journey. Happiness isn't the place you go, it's the road you take to get there, if you follow me. So I hope you follow me with that. And when we take on that, when we internalize that happiness and we become happy because we are happy and because happiness is the way to be, a lot of what we've talked about today really kind of makes a lot of sense. It falls in line. Okay.
So we talked a lot about nutrition today, and not in the traditional way we talk about nutrition. We've talked about it as a primary and secondary food, and the different types were the hydration and the breathing, the intentional movement, and then the food. We didn't really get into the discussion about the types of foods or anything like that. So with this information that we've given you today, it might leave you with, well, where do I go with this? And so we'd like to invite you to the Wellness Champion experience.
Go to htnforyou.com. and you can join our community there. It's free to join. And on that website, there is a button you can click to check out our Wellness Champion experience. We invite you to do that.
That's where a lot of the answers to how what we do, the methods that we use are in the Wellness Champion experience. But with what we've provided to you today, it gives you a starting point with some tips to get you connected with your body and your mind and your spirit as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as I have mentioned before, and I'll say it again, one of the keys to nutrition also is your happiness. As we all know, emotions play a huge part in our lives, our decision-making, and especially in our nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are in a place of happiness, it is so much easier. And what I like to say, and I've said this before, but I will say it again. That happiness is not the destination. Happiness is the road. It's how you get to where you're going, is by being happy. And with that, we'll see you next time on the Wellness Champion Podcast.